hello and good afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everyone who you are and what you teach at Cleveland State University?
Gladly. I'm Rachel Carnell. I'm professor of English. I do 18th and 19th century British literature. I teach classes, sophomores, juniors, seniors, master's students. I teach students about the 19th century and 18th century British novel.
Amazing. Amazing. How did you choose English to become your life's work?
I don't think it was that conscious a decision. I had gone to college as a studious young person and thought studious young people should be pre-med. At some point in the second semester of my sophomore year, a friend said to me, as I was dithering about, well, which major should I actually choose? The friend said, why don't you just choose what you like best? And that completely took me by surprise. And what I liked best at that moment was French literature. And she said, I said, like, major in French literature? And she said, sure. So I put aside the chem lab, the multivariable calculus, the organic, this physics lab, and I started focusing on literature. And then when I'd finished my undergraduate degree and eventually decided to get a PhD, I realized that what was holding me back in terms of getting a PhD in French and becoming a professor of French was that I would be teaching classes and discussing literature with students in a language that wasn't my native language. And I really wanted to connect to students and speak to them in their own language about literature written in their own language. So I made that transition and I applied to do a PhD in English literature. And then I fell into studying the 18th century novel because some helpful professor said to me in the late 1980s, well, the field of the 18th century novel is really opening up. We're uncovering all these really exciting 18th century female novelists writing before Jane Austen that people have overlooked for 100 years. So that threw me into a PhD dissertation on the history of the British novel before Jane Austen. And that put me on the job market in 18th century British literature in a year when Cleveland State was looking for a professor of 18th century British literature. And so here I am.
Well, it all lined up, and I'm glad it did because that's how you and I crossed paths.
It's quite a fortuitous moment.
Yes, it is. So let me ask you, why do you think society overlooks the value of a career in English?
I think when you say, I'll be an English major, or if you say to someone, I'm an English professor, they think, oh, I have to watch my grammar. And while I do try to make sure my students go out in the world and know how to use the comma and the semicolon properly, in case they want to get a side gig as a copy editor, really what literature is about is understanding the history of humanity. When we think about the history of the British novel, that to me is a history of how people have written about what it means to be human. And so the history of literature is the history of what we think it means to be human. It's not just can you use a comma, can you use a semicolon correctly.
Mm-hmm. That's a very powerful statement because when you look around, everyone is on that quest to get closer to humanity and to understand it better and to know why are we in this thing called life and how can we make it better? How can we help each other? And
how do we make sense of it to ourselves? And how do novelists writing in the 18th and 19th century, how did they make sense of being human to themselves? So it's everything you need to know about life, the world, and humanity in a nutshell. But then your sort of larger point is implicitly people say, well, why would you major in English? You want to get a job. You want to get a good job. You want to major in computer science or something technical. And I think the answer to that comes from something that a former student said to us when she came back to speak to some of our then English majors, and she said she's moved up to the very highest echelons of a local corporation. And she said, well, majoring in English means you're good at telling other people what to do, which is an absolutely lovely tip. And I will unpack that a little bit, and I would just say that, to put that sort of in more precise terms, as an English major, you can see to the essence of things and write clearly and persuasively about that essence.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so in that sense, you can move high up on the corporate ladder
Mm-hmm.
if you
Mm-hmm.
see clearly into the essence of that corporation and where it needs to go and what the people you're supervising need to understand and how to persuade and inspire them to do
Mhm.
that.
I think English offers that in general as well, being able to understand, decode, unpack what others may overlook or they may not recognize as a significant nuance. But as an English major, we're trained on inference, we're trained on drilling down into a minute point. If anyone can exaggerate a minute point, it's an English major.
The other thing about that, just in essence to what you're saying, Nina, is that we can tolerate ambiguity, because there are many things you can say about literature, but I always say to my English majors, we like to have our cake and eat it too. The novelist is simultaneously sort of supporting this view of this very British view of the world in the 19th century, but the novelist is also subtly subverting some of the more intolerant overtones of that ideology. So yes, we do. We can acknowledge ambiguity, and we're not afraid of ambiguity.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, it
Which I
allows
think,
us.
yeah, it's an important skill for connecting to other people and not putting other people in silos, us and them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's very capacious in that we can see many angles and hold them all together at one time.
Exactly.
I love that, Dr. Carnell. I really do. So, how many books and articles have you written and published?
So there are 6 big book projects, 2 academic monographs, the first one on the political history of the British novel. I've had 2 scholarly collections of essays. The most recent one is coming out this spring on stewardship and the future of the planet, so far removed from 18th century British literature, although it has that as its starting point. So 2 academic books, 2 academic collections of essays, 1 5-volume scholarly edition. So I annotated an important early British satirist's life's work, 5 volumes of her edition. And then another book of mine is a scholarly biography of her life, this important early 18th century satirist, Dillerby Manley. And then one book that I wrote and came out in 2020 was a book that's both for academic readers and for a non-academic audience. It's called Backlash, Libel, Impeachment, and Populism in the Reign of Queen Anne. So that was my attempt to do a crossover project that academic and non-academic readers could read.
Whoa.
So approximately 6 books, about 24 academic articles in academic type journals. And then of late, 12 op-eds, some in the Plain Dealer, some in the Globalist, some in the Conversation. So 600 to 900 word newspaper articles, opinion pieces, oftentimes connecting something about 18th century politics or literature to something in the present day.
Oh, that's staggering.
So those are the fun pieces to write.
I can tell. I can see it on your face.
Bring the ivory tower to the daily newspaper.
So that makes me curious. Describe your writing process.
It depends what I'm writing. For the op-eds, so those 600 to 900 word things, you just get a glimmer in your eye and start typing. Although I have to say, when I turned from writing academic books and academic articles to newspaper articles, I did what I always teach my students to do, which is I took a model. I have a favorite. There's several of my, if I read the New York Times, several of the columnists whose work I very much admire. I cut and pasted into an empty document an op-ed by a New York Times columnist I admire, Paul Krugman. And then I had my op-ed idea, and I wrote it on top of his. I took his first paragraph. I saw how many sentences he had, how general or specific was his opening, how many paragraphs was it, how many sentences per paragraph, and I used that as an absolute template, and I wrote my first op-ed following the template, the structure of an op-ed by a favorite columnist, and then I've written my subsequent op-eds on my own previous op-eds as a template. And that's how I don't know if you remember from classes you may have taken with me, but oftentimes if I can, I'll give my students samples from previous semesters.
Mm-hmm.
And that way you can see exactly, this is the kind of thing I want you to do, and you can see how this student did it in this paragraph with these sentences, in that paragraph with those sentences. Just to make the point absolutely clear.
Now that you mention it, I do remember receiving quite a few of your templates. I think the one most that comes to my mind is Dr. Carnell's suggestions on how to write well-constructed sentences.
Every year there are more handouts.
Yeah, there is. And I remember receiving quite a few of those from you.
There are new documents. I keep on generating them. How to sound professional.
Yep.
Writing.
Mm-hmm.
Which verbs.
And I saved them too. Honestly, I saved them. I even use them now.
There are more.
Mm-hmm.
They accumulate every year. There are a few more handouts. Tips and pointers to make you sound smarter, as I tell my students.
Yep, they were invaluable, and they're even invaluable now for me in my copywriting work. It's amazing. So, tell me about a specific moment when you were especially happy to be you.
That is an easy one. I am always happiest at the moment when I receive a thank you note from a former student.
Oh.
The students who reach back and think, someone stopped me, well, this wasn't a thank you note, but someone stopped me in the parking lot in Cleveland Heights years ago and said to me, oh, Professor Carnell, I wanted to say, hello, I wanted to tell you that what you taught me in English 400, I use it with my high school students today at this high school where I teach English. So sometimes people will catch me and tell me that something I helped them understand or help them approach. It's really working for them, either as an English teacher or I had an absolutely lovely long email from a student who came, I knew her only on Zoom. It took her 38 years to get her degree from Cleveland State. She had almost finished, and then I don't know what the circumstances were under which she left. I knew that she had had a full career, raised a family, had a full life in Atlanta, and was always regretful that she hadn't quite finished the undergraduate degree in English at Cleveland State. And somehow Zoom, the pandemic, the Zoom format that year, so it was the previous academic year when we were still on Zoom, she Zoomed in from Atlanta, and she was so nervous. She hadn't been in school for decades, and she didn't know how to use the Zoom. She didn't know how to use email, Blackboard. And she would come in. It was an online class. It started at 9 a.m., but for some reason, I would just open up the Zoom a half an hour early in case anyone wanted to come in and chat. She always came in a half an hour early, and I think she stayed. If I could, I left the Zoom open longer. So instead of being on the Zoom for 45 or 50 minutes, she was on it regularly for over an hour and a half, and we worked through all of her essays, and she just needed a lot of reassurance. Mm-hmm. And she absolutely pulled out a nice grade in that class, and she was so proud of the progress she had made. And anyway, the day she wrote me a beautiful thank you note, which it was definitely something I cherished.
She was really committed, and you were equally committed with her to see that through.
If students really want to learn, it's a pleasure to work with them and help them learn.
Mm-hmm. 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 Very
As
good.
you yourself well know. You know?
Yes. Oh, I remember you very, very, very well to be very committed, devoted, loyal. You often went over and above and beyond what we needed to make sure that we were successful. And because you knew we were setting up ourselves for life, we weren't just trying to pass a class. We were trying to get ready for life and pass the class of life and be able to do what we're doing now, come back all these many, 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 many years later, catch up, update, and see how the degree is working or what we took from you that is only enhancing our lives now. So I'm sure that her story matches mine in so many ways.
If students want to learn, there's so much we can teach them, and I always hesitate to send students out in the world unless they have the necessary skill set under their belt.
That's very, and you care about that, because I've had many instructors, and you see, I chose you to lift this story. So that says a lot too, and we are so grateful to teachers like you for that.
I was lucky also in having good teachers, inspiring teachers in my life.
So it looks like we've coming to a conclusion, but we have one more thing to talk about. Is there something you would like to get across?
Well, I know you and I were talking a little bit in the interview about things before we turn the recording on, about things we learn about the world, learn about people around us. And I think I settled on, if there are one thing I've noticed about humanity, is its tendency to procrastinate. And I see it with my students, the students who followed the timeline. I suggested them, write the first draft of your essay a week in advance, post it on Blackboard so I and other students can comment on it, take the comments seriously, make revisions, turn in something polished. The students, half of the students in the classroom will start a week early, as they are supposed to do, and turn in nicely polished work, and they'll be proud of it. There will be a certain contingent of the class that doesn't start early enough.
Of course.
That will start it very late, need an extension, and turn in work that is shoddy and not their best work, and then they'll feel bad. And I think that capacity for procrastination it's the thing that puts humanity most at risk, and it's not that humanity is put at risk whether some of my procrastinating students turn in shoddy work at the end of the day. But we put ourselves at risk when there are long-term crises that humanity has to address. Climate crisis just is one of the many crises looming on the horizon, where if we started in a timely fashion and worked at it together, could really make a difference, rather than leaving it for the last minute and just sort of hoping for the best.
Nice parallel to English and the synthesis and the organization that's required to prepare is what I heard in that explanation that you just gave. Is preparation applies to every facet of our life, from personal life to professional life to global affairs, international affairs, everywhere. And we fare better. We turn in work that's polished, and that affects not only just us, but our children, our prospects, everything. And leave it to you to be able to make that gesture and show us to tie it all together like that.
We want to do work that we're proud of as human beings, whether it's putting our best foot forward in our own writing or as humanity looking out for the future of our own species and planet.
Wow. Yes, and here again, English, there's not a subject or discipline or topic that English does not touch. It's just not possible.
It's all of human experience.
Yes, it is. Yes. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's great to see you. It really is.
It's been a pleasure to see you again, Nina. I'm thrilled with the way your own writing and editing career has just taken off of late, and congratulations for the hard work you put in there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we will be talking soon.